Hello, my name is Simon Owens, and this is my vlog. Today, I wanted to talk about Apple, and particularly its content plays and why it really sucks at content. And when I say content, I mean movie content, television content, music content, news content, book content. People who aren't as familiar with the company probably don't realize how important a role content has played, particularly in terms of Apple's comeback, with Steve Jobs. One of the things that really kind of turned the tides for Apple was the release of the iconic device known as the iPod. And one of the reasons that the iPod was so successful in terms of consumer sales and adoption was because Steve Jobs was so successful at negotiating a content deal for the iTunes music store. Before iTunes, there really wasn't a good mechanism for online downloads of music, at least a legal way. And back before Apple had any market share in that realm, he was really able to successfully negotiate with these record labels. Basically, they had seen the writing on the walls, had seen the rise of Napsters. They had successfully sued it out of existence, but they saw other file sharing sites coming up, and they really kind of realized that the era of lucrative CD scales were over, and so that's when they kind of took a leap of faith. And because of that leap of faith, the iTunes store sold something like 1 million downloads in its first week. It soon became the dominant player in terms of legal online downloads of music, and then became eventually, over the years, with the rise of the iPod and the later rise of the iPhone, the leading distributor of legal music, basically. So content played a huge part in terms of Apple's success down the line. But in recent years, Apple has really struggled when it comes to securing rights to content and displaying it, even though it's supposedly the dominant player in terms of watching and viewing content. One great example was music streaming. You would think with its success with iTunes that it would have dominated music streaming, but it was incredibly late to this with the launch of the Apple Music app, and it's still, despite having a home screen advantage, trails far behind Spotify in terms of downloads and paying subscribers, and also was much more widely panned by tech critics in terms of its UI. So it really has not been able to grab a strong foothold in the music streaming industry. Ebooks. It was also late to the ebooks game. Kindle and Amazon really kind of built that entire market from scratch. And even though they negotiated good terms with publishers, they were not only have they failed to get real market share. iBooks only has about 10% of the market share for ebooks, but Apple actually got slapped by an antitrust lawsuit because of the way that it negotiated with booksellers. So that really kind of set it back. A lot of people don't know this, but it was actually trying for years to negotiate a kind of cable-killing iTunes subscription service for basically TV programming. It was trying to negotiate with all the major networks so the kinds of things that you got through a cable subscription, you can get through this kind of skinny bundle, like a $30 a month skinny bundle on iTunes. And after years of trying to negotiate this, it finally just gave up on it because it couldn't get the rates that it was wanting, mainly because a lot of these TV networks didn't want to start cannibalizing their own lucrative cable market from places like Comcast and Time Warner. Another thing that it tried to do was it tried to tackle Facebook, Twitter, Flipboard head on and launch an Apple News app. And this was going to be the place where people started really kind of consuming news on their phones. Again, it had a home screen advantage, but again, it only has about 50 million monthly users. And even though some publishers are reporting, decent traffic from it, they're also saying at the same time that it's generating virtually no ad revenue for them, even though it's trying to create its own kind of ad tech network and is trying to sell ads within the Apple News app. Another one has been, just recently, Apple has been trying to make new gains in the TV space, but it's run into trouble negotiating with studios on 4K video, and has also been trying to negotiate, terms on that front, and has even been trying to develop some of its own content. Obviously, a lot of that's in the future, but its first major show rollout, which was kind of like a Battle of the Apps, which is kind of like a Shark Tank ripoff, was pretty badly panned by critics all around. So it's still stumbling as it's trying, and it's been trying to move into TV for years, and every single step of the way, it's been stumbling. If there's one bright spot in terms of the content games for Apple, it's been its podcast app. It was one of the obviously the entire podcast is named after the iPod, and it was an early entrant into the podcast market, and it still has the majority market share, somewhere around 70% of podcast downloads are happening through the podcast app on Apple. That being said, the podcast app has been kind of a redheaded stepchild. Apple hasn't really made a lot of new updates, and hasn't really innovated on that front. It just now recently announced that it's going to be offering better metrics to podcasters. But other than that, the app has mainly been untouched and only has a very small staff dedicated to it. So I think that leaves it very vulnerable to upcoming competitors like Overcast, Stitcher, and others. So yeah, I think that's definitely, podcasting is definitely something that Apple shouldn't take for granted. And at the same time, though, if it's going to create the kind of user lock-in that it's hoping through its services, so to get more and more people on its devices, it's really going to have to up its game in terms of its content. And I think that's why you're seeing so much emphasis on its music app and so much emphasis on it trying to set aside money so that it could actually start funding new original shows. I guess in the future, it's really going to have to up its game and start doing better from the content perspective.